Hi everyone, this is a tutorial to show you how to use Kitchener stitch to graft a tubular bind off. Now here I have already worked the two rounds that are almost like a setup round for the tubular bind off. So I've worked one round where I knit one through the back loop, slip one with the yarn in front, and then I've also worked the second setup round, which is slip one with yarn to the back and purl one. So then I've cut my yarn so that I've got a tail that's around about 3 times the length of the circumference that's going to be bound off, and I'm ready to make a start on Kitchener stitch. Now here you have two options. One option is to separate the knit and the purl stitches onto 2 sets of needles. So you would slip the knit stitches to the existing set of needles that you're working with, and you'd slip the purl stitches to a second set of needles, a second cable needle. You can do that and then you use just the standard Kitchener stitch to bind off those 2 sets of stitches from the 2 separate needles. What I'm going to show you here though, it skips that step out. So you are binding off all the stitches on from this one set of needles, and it just saves you that extra step of separating the stitches out. If you find this confusing and you'd rather stick to the standard Kitchener stitch, then feel free to go ahead and slip those stitches to a second set of needles and work your normal Kitchener stitch bind off. So to get set up, first of all, you're going to go through the first stitch purlwise, and for now all the stitches are staying on your needle, and then you're going to go behind that first stitch and you're going to go knitwise into the second stitch through the back. So if you can, I'll show you really closely. I'm bringing my needle from back to front between the first and second stitches, and then just grabbing that first leg of that stitch so that my needle goes through it knitwise and pull that through. Okay, so those are your first 2 setup steps, and now we're working Kitchener stitch, the Kitchener stitch pattern as normal. So I'm going to come through the first stitch knitwise, and I'm going to slip that from my needle. I'm then going to go, once I've pulled my tail through, which at the moment is very long, so I've gone through my first knit stitch knitwise. I'll then go through the next knit stitch purlwise. I'm coming in front of this stitch, which is still on the needle. That stitch does not come off the needle. Then I'll go through my first purl stitch purlwise, and that stitch comes off the needle. And then I'll go through the next purl stitch knitwise. So once again, I'll show you really closely. I'll go behind that first stitch, bring my tapestry needle to the front, and then sneak knitwise through that stitch. Okay, and that is the pattern that you keep repeating. I'll show you it again because it is tricky at first. So you go through the first stitch knitwise. This is the first of 4 steps that you're repeating here. So go through that stitch knitwise, and that stitch comes off the needle. Go through the, what is now the second stitch from the end, your next knit stitch purlwise. That stitch stays on the needle. Then you'll go through the end stitch purlwise, and it comes off the needle. And then you go through the second stitch on your needle knitwise. Okay, so once you get used to doing those steps, you can speed it up a little bit more by working 2 of the steps at a time. So you go in through the first stitch knitwise, and that stitch comes off the needle, in through the second stitch purlwise, that stitch stays on the needle, then pull the yarn through. Oops. And then the second 2 steps, in through the first stitch purlwise, that stitch comes off the needle, in through the second stitch from the back knitwise, and then pull those 2 thread through. So then you're kind of condensing the movements a little bit more. So it's knit in through this one knitwise off the needle, in through the second stitch purlwise, pull it through, in through the first stitch purlwise, and that stitch comes off the needle, in through the second stitch knitwise, those stitches stay on the needle. So that just helps to speed things up. You're not having to pull tons of yarn through as frequently. And you can continue in that way until you've worked all the stitches in your round. Okay, so I've continued working that pattern and I've reached a point where I'm nearly at the end of the round, and I have 2 stitches left on my needles. So you're going to start working these last 2 stitches in the same pattern. That means coming knitwise through the first stitch, and you slip that off your needle. What you would then be doing is going purlwise through the second stitch on your left needle, which would also be the next knit stitch. So what you're going to do instead is you're going to look for where that next knit stitch is in the bind off and go purlwise through it. So you're going to come through it like that. So you're continuing the same pattern, it's just that the last 2 stitches that you need to work into are no longer on your needles. So then the second part of that is to go purlwise through this stitch, and that comes off the needles, and then you're going to look to come knitwise, you're going to come knitwise through the final purl stitch. So we're looking to come through this purl stitch here, which on the other side is a knit stitch. So you're going to come purlwise through there. So it's the same pattern, it's just that for the very last 2 stitches, they're also the first 2 stitches that you worked at the beginning of the round. And then you're ready to weave in that end, and you have the tubular bind off completed.